Well, when last we spoke, we talked a bit about a potential budget. Today, it is a budget for the city of Battle Creek, having been passed on a 7-2 vote last night at the Battle Creek City Commission. And back with us to discuss that is our city manager, Rebecca Fleury, and our finance director, Linda Morrison. Good morning to you both.
Good morning, Richard.
15, 20 minutes of sleep last night. Now you're here.
A little more than that. Yeah.
A little more. All right. Well, we appreciate the quick turnaround today. So let's talk about this in the zoomed out perspective for just a minute. This did not change much, did it, from what we thought would be the budget, or at least that which was being discussed when we talked last time?
No, actually, the budget that was passed by the City Commission last night was the budget that was recommended and proposed by staff, and that was included in the agenda packet last night.
All right, so this includes, let's just run down the features of this here first. We talked about a little of it before, but let's be clear about it.
So this budget was one of three that the city commissioners had to consider, but this, we call it option A, included a 0.5 millage increase for capital projects and capital project debt, as well as a slight increase for the police and fire pension. So 0.5 for the capital projects and capital debt, and a 0.183 for the police and fire pension millage.
All right, and this also includes the cut to the Southwest Michigan Community Development Corporation that we talked about before. This includes the elimination of some positions, right?
Yes.
As well.
Yep. Yes, that is correct. So unfortunately, yes, it did include the elimination of funding to the Southwest Michigan Community Development Corporation, SWMCDC. And yes, we had some vacant positions that were not funded as part of this, because remember, just to get to those option A pieces, we had already taken some pretty deep cuts in some of the departments just to get to the three proposals that we had to put in front of the commission, which is it's never a position that we like as staff, but we are required to get to a balanced budget, and we try to give our commissioners as many options to consider so that they can make an informed decision, because it's tough on them too. I know that over the past 2 weeks, they have received many calls and comments and questions about the budget and all of the pieces of the budget, which there are so many. And so I have to give a great deal of credit to the commissioners who had a very difficult decision to make last night. They had a very good discussion. And then ultimately, as you said, on a 7-2 vote, they approved the budget for fiscal year 17.
So is it 5 positions being eliminated? You said those are vacant. All of them are vacant positions now?
4 were vacant.
4, okay.
And 1 will be a retirement.
I see. Okay. So I guess that's what you call attrition, and then we're just taking advantage of that.
Yes, that's correct.
Situation. So, Linda, how does this make you feel? This, as far as when you look at the budget itself and say, okay, we have to be balanced, we have to get to point B. Does this do it?
I agree with Rebecca. It was a difficult budget cycle, and the commission made a tough decision to raise the property taxes and use some fund balance. But all in all, I think it's a good budget. I think we're moving in the right direction here. So.
All right, and when we come back in a minute, we'll talk more about the tax increase part of this and try and understand what that's about in just a minute on WBCK 8:30. We're here with Rebecca Fleury, City Manager, and Linda Morrison, Finance Director in Battle Creek. So, as you alluded, there is a component of this that is a tax increase, right?
Correct. Yes. Well, technically there are 2. One is a 0.5 millage increase for capital projects. In this particular one, the biggest lion's share of that will go towards a new police facility, which was one of the biggest items in our budget this year. So with the approval of the budget, that's a go-ahead for staff to move forward on a new police facility. So that 0.5 millage will go to pay that the bond debt for that particular project. It was one of the, and I appreciated Commissioner Scherzer's comment last night, is that if we're going to do the project, we have to have a mechanism to pay for it, and that was one of the reasons and the good discussions about why to consider a 0.5 millage increase. And one of the things we did at a budget workshop we had on the 19th of May was to talk about and to take a look at what have tax bills in the city of Battle Creek done over the past decade, because you want to look at, because we don't want to overburden our residents. That's never been the intent. Just trying to keep up with the demand for service and the cost to do business. In 2016, it's a very different cost to do business than it was in 2006.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we looked at back over a decade, basically, of tax bills, even with this 0.5 increase, we are not back to the tax bill level that we had in 2008, 9, 10, before kind of we started to feel the housing crunch.
Right.
And so while that's not comforting to some, I think the commissioners took into consideration that we still have relatively low tax bills when you look at it in the grand scheme of things, just because of what, property tax values have done and kind of the economy from this point forward. And then the police and fire pension millage was a voted on millage. And I think Linda said last night, I think it was in 1962, that the residents voted to put a millage in place to support the police and fire pension fund.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I know. So, and it's an uncapped.
It's not capped.
It's an uncapped millage. So we often refer to as it floats. As it costs more to keep up with the police and fire pension millage, the millage goes up and down.
Mm-hmm.
Now, prior to this year, the commission has not really floated that, and so the general fund has absorbed that difference. But because we're so tight with revenues right now, we really didn't have the absorption in the general fund, and so we needed to float. That was that 0.183.
Yeah, the two dissenters, Mark Benke and Deb Owens, were quoted in the Inquirer story as not having known that the capital improvement, the police building part, was a part of this, if I've read that correctly. But had that been discussed before, and that was clear in the options, was it not?
It had been. We did a work session with the commission on the police facility options, because and I can't remember if we've talked about it here, Richard, or not,
Yeah.
but we went through a very substantial, almost a 1-year process, gathering public input and doing some studies on 2 options for police facilities. First of all, we didn't even get to 2 options until we did an extensive community input session, community conversations. We did tours of both police and fire facilities. But then police there was only 2 options for the police facility. We looked at a building that we could potentially rehab for that,
Right.
and then we looked at a new construction cost. So we talked about that at a work session. And the commissioners, for the majority of them, were really adamant that it needed to stay downtown. And then the savings between a rehab and a new facility really weren't enough when you talk about a 10-year-old facility versus a brand new facility. And so they really kind of honed in on a new facility. And we knew that we still had discussions when it comes to budget. So we always knew that probably a project of this size, because it is a large size, we're talking probably $15 million in our early estimates, would need bond approval and have to be considered as part of the fiscal year 17 budget process.
Mm-hmm. And so this is the direction in which we're going now. That study has been done, at least, that helped decide whether or not we were going to stick with a building we'd rehab or a new one, and that is where this stands now. So we're through this process, we're funding a new building. Is what's happening.
So part of the fiscal year 17 budget that was approved last night was a line item to pay bond debt on a new police facility. That's correct.
And that bond debt service includes a couple of other projects as well. A new telephone system for the city, some capital corrections at the C.O. Brown ball stadium,
and some fire equipment.
So.
Okay, things that we generally need: working phones and working fire trucks, right?
Yes, sir.
Mm-hmm.
All right, we're back in a minute to talk more about a budget proposal approved last night at City Commission. We're talking with Rebecca Fleury and Linda Morrison today. We're here with City Manager Rebecca Fleury and Finance Director Linda Morrison from the City of Battle Creek, talking about money. We talked about the budget picture before the vote, which happens to have been last night with the City Commission. So now we have a budget in place. And as you pointed out, we've got the priority-based budgeting going on, and we have a requirement to balance that budget. And that's for good reason, right? I mean, if you don't balance the budget, then you carry a deficit with you, and that's like a dark cloud over your head.
Right. We do not have the luxury of what the federal government has. We have to balance the budget for the state of Michigan. And so, yes, and we needed to do that by our charter by June 30th. So that's one of the reasons why we always get to June and we get a budget that will begin July 1st. But I appreciate you talking about the priority-based budgeting, because while we weren't in full priority-based budgeting implementation for this budget year, we just didn't have enough time. We certainly will be for next year, and that means, soon after July 1, we will start planning for fiscal year 18's budget, because we heard from the commissioners very clear, wow, we got an increase of 0.5 on the property tax, that we're not going to go back there again. We don't want to go back there again. So if we continue to have really tight revenues, we're going to have to take a look at our all of our services and determine if it stays at that particular level or we need to make some changes.
Linda, how does priority-based budgeting affect your worldview here? Because one might say it affects you somehow in terms of how you execute it, but others might say, well, you just do what you're told, right?
Well, we're still learning the tool that we have and helping departments use that tool. So my staff in the finance department, we're getting very familiar with looking things up and data-driven kinds of exercises. Mm-hmm. So we're getting prepared for looking at those quartile 3s and 4 programs to say, okay, what can we do different? Where are there opportunities for saving money and program changes? So we'll be doing that over the next 3 or 4 months, I expect, and talking with departments and helping them learn how to use the tool.
Okay. Let's talk about the Southwest Michigan Community Development Corporation cut there. When you and I talked about that before, Rebecca, you had a few choices about how you might go about writing this, and this was one of the options. Not necessarily the most favored option, but it was there. We did chat with Bill Phillips last week about this potential, and of course, he was very positive at the time, saying, we're trying to just figure out how we can help each other and do the right thing. Obviously, this didn't change, though.
No, unfortunately, it didn't. It has. We have had a long-standing partnership with SWMCDC, formerly NIBC,
mm-hmm.
And we do have to sit down and talk about where are we moving forward, because it's not that the work that both of us do are ending. So we have to figure out what kind of that new normal is going to be, and we want to work closely with them to figure out what that is and kind of what their plan is going forward. And so that will take the city staff working with Bill's staff to determine just what that looks like.
Do you go into this with the notion that this some of this money for the former Neighborhoods Incorporated might be reinstated at some point, or do you go into it saying this is no longer possible?
That's a really good question, and I if I had a crystal ball, I'd probably be able to answer that better. Of course, we would have liked to fully fund everything that we had and new initiatives that we'd like to embark upon. Just the revenues weren't there. And so I would never say that door is permanently closed. I think we would always take a look at any of our partners that we have funding relationships with, and as pictures change, we can certainly relook at that at some point in time, if that is basically the direction of the commission as well.
Mm-hmm. And we're also looking at more than $500,000 that we're grabbing out of our reserves to try and shore this up. How's your feeling about that? I mean, it's there for these kinds of situations, but you hope you don't have to do this too much.
Right. We do not want to repeat this next year. And that's part of where we see the assistance of the priority-based budgeting model help us find a way to make the revenues equal the expenditures for the next year budget.
Mm-hmm. So we go into this then with I hesitate to say priority, but with the idea that we don't want to go that route again next year.
That's correct. We heard that message loud and clear from the city commissioners. And no, that is exactly why full implementation of priority-based budgeting will get us to the point where we won't have to do that. Even if we're faced with these tight revenues next year, we won't be looking to dip into the fund balance anymore, because it's at a level where we're comfortable and we wouldn't want it to go any lower. And it affects things like when bond rating agencies look at you about what you have in that savings account. And two, we're not going to increase the property, taxes, unless there was some sort of catastrophic or emergency event. It's very clear that what we'll need to do is then consider right-sizing ourselves, or figure out that we need to do those services that are priorities, as you say, and figure out how to do them maybe at a reduction, or find the savings that we can.
We were talking with Brenda Hunt last week from the BC Vision perspective, and she made a remark about the last several years and how difficult they've been, and her perspective that we're not out of it yet here in Battle Creek. Do you see it that way too?
Yes, because I think the last time we were here, we talked about the fact that local governments and communities of our size, we kind of lag behind the national economy. So we don't feel others are feeling this economy upturn. We probably won't feel it for another 3 to 5 years. So I agree with Brendan that we're always behind. It's one of the reasons when we took a look at the property tax bills, we were amazed to see that we didn't start feeling that housing crunch until like 10. So the rest of the country was feeling it in 7 and 8-ish, but we started to see those property tax declines and kind of the negative effects in 10, 11, and 12. So we kind of lag 3 to 5 years from what the nation is feeling. So I can respect and understand why Brenda would say that, and I think we'll feel that. Even though we're feeling some baby increases in property tax values in the economy, we won't fully feel the effects for a couple of more years.
And we are limited to the rate of inflation as well, and how much the growth in taxable value can go.
And Commissioner Hempel, he did a really good job last night talking about the fact that our hands are very limited based on some of the legislation at the state level, with the Headley and with Proposal A.
Right.
We can only rise with the rate of inflation, even if, we have some growth beyond that.
Right. So even if somebody's home suddenly rebounds with great amounts of value, we don't feel that at the tax level right
Correct.
off. Yeah. All right. Well, we appreciate your helping us understand what's taken place. We'll stay in touch.
Thank you, Richard.
Rebecca Fleury is City Manager in Battle Creek, and Linda Morrison, Finance Director. 8:20.